1996. Cali cartel kingpin Helmer Herrera, known for surviving assassination attempts and aiding in Pablo Escobar's downfall, surprised everyone by turning himself in and ending his reign. Little did he know that his end would be in prison while playing soccer. This is what happens to cartel members in prison. Number 10. Pablo Escobar. In 1991, when drug lord and king of coke, Pablo Escobar, agreed to serve a prison sentence in Colombia, he went all out, building himself a prison so lavish, it earned nicknames like La Catedral and Hotel Escobar, and boy did it live up to that name. The place was no ordinary prison. It had everything you could possibly imagine: a football field, a jacuzzi, even a waterfall. Indeed, La Catedral was a fortress more than a prison, as Escobar effectively kept his enemies out rather than lock himself in. And he would go on conducting his shady business. I mean, could you be happier in your mugshot? So the Colombian government had no other option but to agree with his terms, since they'd been struggling for years trying to prosecute him and his Medellin cartel. Now the terms were clear. Escobar and his associates would stop their domestic terrorism and surrender themselves to the authorities. In return, they would be guaranteed protection from extradition to the U.S. Escobar was determined to avoid being tried in a U.S. court, often saying, "Better a grave in Colombia than a cell in the U.S." So during negotiations, Escobar had additional conditions for his surrender, including reduced jail time to 5 years, and he would serve that time in a prison of his choosing. And he would build his own prison, which would be guarded by his own people, and that he would be protected from his rivals in Colombia. June 19, 1991. The drug lord was flown by chopper to a mountaintop, where he chose to construct that prison for strategic reasons. He bade farewell to his family, walked past the armed guards, and entered that compound through the 10-foot-high barbed wire fence. There, he officially signed his surrender document. Now, to the outside world, it appeared to be a typical surrender. However, the facade of barbed wire and concrete fences concealed a much different reality. While most federal prisoners do have access to gyms in the U.S., they usually don't get these luxury saunas, jacuzzis, or maybe a pool with a fancy waterfall. And just forget about hosting national teams in your prison, like Escobar did when he brought over the Colombian national team to play on his personal soccer field. La Catedral also had an industrial kitchen, a billiards room, multiple bars with big screen TVs, and even a disco where the kingpin threw some wedding receptions during his time behind bars. And what kind of food was he eating? We have stuffed turkey, caviar, fresh salmon, and smoked trout, all while surrounded by beauty queens. On top of that, as opponents to the policy of negotiated surrender had predicted, imprisonment didn't prevent Escobar from running his drug empire. Now, during his time at Hotel Escobar, the kingpin received more than 300 unauthorized guests, which included several wanted criminals. And the story continues. In 1992, Escobar put hits on several cartel leaders along with their entourages and families from the security of his luxurious La Catedral. And that's when the Colombian government decided it was time to end this charade. They decided to transfer him to a military prison, where he would be deprived of this luxurious lifestyle and influence. And by the time the army got to La Catedral, Escobar was long gone. He had simply walked out that door undisturbed. December 1st, 1993, on his 44th birthday, Escobar had let his guard down and spent too much time on the phone with his son. The very next day, his secret hideout was uncovered. A gunfight with Colombian forces ensued, during which Escobar was struck down by a fatal bullet. And while Pablo's undoubtedly the most well-known Colombian drug lord, this next person on the list built another Colombian cartel that outlived even Escobar's. Number 9. Gilberto Rodriguez Orella. Known as the chess player, Orella ran the Cali cartel's cocaine empire with a business-like approach until he was extradited to the U.S., where he eventually died in prison. Rodriguez grew up in a middle-class family in Cali, Colombia. When his father left the family, he had to work as a drugstore delivery boy to make ends meet. But Rodriguez and his younger brother, Miguel, had bigger dreams. They formed the Los Chemas gang, engaging in criminal activities like kidnapping and extortion. And as time went on, that gang evolved into the infamous Cali Cartel. Now, the Cali Cartel was more than just a drug operation. Rodriguez was the mastermind behind the finances, overseeing a vast organization including real estate, a pharmacy chain, a network of radio stations, and even a soccer team. And what set Rodriguez and the Cali Cartel apart from other drug organizations was their unique approach. While their rival, the Medellin cartel led by Escobar, relied on fast boats and planes to transport drugs and resorted to public violence, the Cali cartel took a different route. They would get slower, less flashy merchant marine vessels moving their drugs, and preferred making deals with police and politicians instead of engaging with them in violence. By the 1990s, Orella and the Cali Cartel were at the peak of their power, responsible for smuggling over 200 tons of cocaine into the U.S. However, as their influence grew, it eventually became a double-edged sword. June 9, 1995, Rodriguez was apprehended by the Colombian National Police during a raid on his house in Cali. He received a 15-year prison sentence, but was controversially released after just 7 years, thanks to a judicial order that cited his good behavior and participation in work-study programs. Now, this decision wouldn't sit well with the DEA. They demanded to rearrest the brothers on new charges, as even behind bars, Rodriguez and his brother continued overseeing their operations, and the drugs continued flowing into the U.S. So in March 2003, Rodriguez and his brother were indeed rearrested in Cali. A year later, they were extradited to the U.S. and received a 30-year sentence after pleading guilty to conspiring to import cocaine into the country. February 6, 2020, Rodriguez tried his luck by submitting an application seeking compassionate early release due to a multitude of chronic illnesses, including cancer. Nevertheless, his long criminal history made it highly unlikely for him to have his sentence cut in half, so it came as to no surprise when a federal judge turned down his application. May 31, 2022, Gilberto Rodriguez Orella died at a prison medical center at the age of 83. Despite him being behind bars, the Cali Cartel's reign did not come to an end until the capture of this next person. Number 8. Helmer Pacho Herrera. Now, Orella may have been the brains behind the Cali Cartel, but it was Helmer here, also known as Pacho, who turned it into one of the most powerful drug cartels in the world. However, Pacho eventually grew tired of life on the run, which led him to surrender himself. Little did he know that after a life of surviving many assassination attempts, he'd be killed in prison while playing soccer. Not much is known about Pacho's early life, but he did grow up near the city of Palmira in Colombia. After finishing high school, he decided to move to New York City, where he worked as a jeweler for a while, but soon realized that selling coke would bring in way more cash. 1983, he became a major player in the drug trade when he moved back to Colombia and made contact with the Cali Cartel. Now, with the cartel's resources and his own connections in the U.S., Herrera started smuggling massive amounts of cocaine into New York. Within just a few years, he became a key player in the cartel's operations. But as luck would have it, another infamous drug lord in Colombia would soon become his biggest rival. The late 1980s, two low-level cocaine traffickers got into a fight over a woman they were both involved with in New York City. A gun battle broke out, leaving several people dead. One of the shooters ran to Herrera for protection. The men he had just killed were, after all, allies of one of the most feared drug lords in the world, Pablo Escobar. When Escobar sent out word that he wanted that guy's head, Herrera refused. Escobar replied, "Then this is war, and I'm gonna kill every one of you sons of bitches." And so the Cali and Medellin cartels went against each other in an all-out war. 1988, an explosion destroyed an apartment building in Colombia owned by Escobar. Escobar suspected Pacho was behind it, so he would get a squad of killers dressed as cops to open fire on a crowd where Herrera was sitting, watching a soccer game. They killed 18 people, but not Herrera. In this other attempt, gunmen would ambush him at a resort, leaving several people dead yet again, but Herrera survived. The war finally stopped because the cartels decided they had a mutual enemy, the Colombian government. After making peace, the cartels worked together to coerce the government into amending the Constitution to outlaw extradition to the U.S. through a series of murders. When that was over, the cartels would go back at each other's throats. Though it was never proven, many suspected that Herrera was heavily involved in financing Los Pepes, a paramilitary death squad helping to bring down Escobar. 1993. When Escobar finally died, the Cali cartel cornered the cocaine market, at one point supplying 80% of all cocaine in the world and pulling in $8 billion a year. But as we said before, the Cali cartel's rise to dominance also led to their downfall. Herrera actually managed to avoid capture for a while. That was until the DEA launched this massive operation that targeted 2 of his distribution cells in New York City. 1996. Pacho realized the authorities were closing in and decided to surrender. He was the last of the Cali cartel leaders to be arrested. Now, once in prison, he devoted himself to soccer, becoming its organizer in the prison and sponsoring soccer tournaments. He also went for a bachelor's degree in business administration, but his newly found aspiration would forever remain unfulfilled. November 6, 1998. A man posing as a lawyer would approach him during a break in a soccer game and shoot him multiple times in the head and stomach. The shooter's exact motives remain uncertain, but it's safe to say that he made plenty of enemies throughout his life. Number 7. Edgar Valdez Villarreal. 2010. Mexican authorities finally caught up with Edgar, also known as La Barbie. But before that, he was this ruthless drug lord and a top lieutenant in the Beltron cartel. But his arrest wasn't the end of his story. Valdez started off as just another member of the Beltron cartel. He quickly climbed through the ranks though, thanks to all his connections from the US. He eventually became the leader of an enforcement squad called Los Negros, yet he still aspired for more. Now, following the death of his boss, Arturo Beltran Leyva, Valdez saw that opportunity to take control. He would wage a brutal gang war, resorting to sick tactics like torture and decapitation. Over 150 people lost their lives in this chaos. So you can imagine both the DEA and Mexican government were hell-bent on taking him down. August 30th, 2010. Edgar was arrested by Mexican federal police at a hideout near Mexico City. Now, following that arrest, the police released a video in which Valdez revealed to his interrogators how he smuggled drugs from Panama to the US and then sneaked cash back into Mexico in trailers. His American lawyer claimed that he was innocent and that the video confession was coerced. However, he had no concrete evidence to back up that claim, and it was decided that Valdez would be extradited to the US. September 30th, 2015. Valdez was sentenced to 49 years in the high-security federal prison USP Coleman II in Florida. That meant that he would never see the light of day until 2056. However, something happened. November 30th, 2022. The name Edgar Valdez Villarreal mysteriously vanished from the Federal Bureau of Prisons website. Instead, it was replaced with "not in BOP custody." Well, that raised a lot of eyebrows, with everybody wondering what happened to Valdez, not being under the BOP's watchful eye anymore. A spokesperson from the BOP would decline to reveal the reasons behind his absence from their custody, vaguely mentioning that lots of factors could be involved. Inmates could be temporarily relocated for court hearings, medical treatments, or other unspecified reasons. What could those unspecified reasons possibly be? So according to some experts on Mexican cartels, there's a belief that Valdez probably made a deal with the federal authorities. On the other hand, they're saying that he might have escaped this maximum security prison. Considering the high level of security from that prison, such an event would undoubtedly be a major embarrassment to federal authorities and probably to the entire US government. Perhaps that's why they wanted to keep it a secret until they could find him again. February 2023, Edgar Valdez Villarreal was returned to the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Nobody knows for certain whether he was recaptured or if the alleged secret deal he made with the authorities turned out to be unsuccessful. Number 6. Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. Known as El Padrino or the Godfather, Gallardo would spend 18 years building his empire. But the brutal murder of an undercover DEA agent who infiltrated his cartel would be his downfall. January 8, 1946, Gallardo was born on a ranch in Sinaloa, Mexico. He joined the police force at 17 and started working for the government as a Mexican federal judicial police agent. While working as a bodyguard for the Sinaloa governor, Felix met Pedro Aviles Perez, a drug smuggler. In no time, Perez recruited Gallardo for his marijuana and heroin enterprise. And when Perez died in a shootout with the police, Gallardo took over that business, consolidating Mexico's drug trafficking system under a single operation, the Guadalajara cartel. Now, his partnership with other cartels strengthened his business. What would help him more is Mexican intelligence protecting him from getting into serious trouble along the way. And so, as Felix Gallardo paid the right people, a ring of corruption kept his team out of jail and his cartel operations safe. That's until the murder of DEA agent Kiki Camarena. February 7, 1985, a group of corrupt Mexican officials kidnapped Camarena, who'd infiltrated the Guadalajara cartel. His abduction was in retaliation for the destruction of Rancho Búfalo, which Mexican soldiers had been able to find thanks to his work. A month later, Camarena's remains were found, 70 miles outside of Guadalajara. He'd been severely tortured, and before long, Felix became a suspect, alongside his two partners, Rafael Caro Quintero and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo. Most cartel informants thought that Gallardo had ordered Camarena's capture, but that Quintero had ordered his death. Later, Felix would say that he never intended to kill Camarena, as whoever would kill an agent had to be a madman willing to have that full force of the US government brought down on him, which was true. Camarena's death brought the full wrath of the DEA down on the Guadalajara cartel. Quintero and Carrillo were arrested a couple of months after the murder. Gallardo's political connections kept him safe for a while, but the mounting pressure from the US government eventually caught up with him. 1989, Mexican authorities would arrest Felix at his house. He was initially given 40 years. After serving 28, a retrial sentenced him to another 37 years. Even while incarcerated, Gallardo remained one of Mexico's major traffickers, maintaining his empire over the phone. As he aged, Felix complained that he lived in poor conditions while in jail. He said that he lived in a 240 by 440 centimeter cell, which he wasn't allowed to leave even to use the recreational area. 2022, after a long legal battle, Felix Gallardo was finally granted house arrest due to his declining health. Number 5. Jose Artemio Maldonado Mejia. November 2021. Jose was apprehended by the police. He was facing charges of being involved in a mass murder and kidnapping and was subsequently transferred to the Tula prison in Hidalgo, Mexico. Now, before his arrest, Jose was the leader of a violent kidnapping and fuel theft ring called Pueblos Unidos, which was known to be extremely violent. January 2019, this horrifying explosion occurred about 10 miles outside of Tula, resulting in the tragic deaths of 137 people. This incident was caused by a failed fuel robbery attempt. The gang had illegally tapped into one of Mexico's most important oil pipelines, which connected Tula's large refinery to the Gulf Coast. For hours, oil spilled near the town of Tlahuelipan. Locals would gather to collect that seemingly free gasoline, but the situation soon turned deadly when the fuel ignited, creating a massive fireball. And so after this incident, the search for Jose intensified until he was finally arrested. But unfortunately, that only lasted for a month. December 1st, 2021, a gang pulled off an insane prison break at the Tula prison. They would use a jerry-rigged truck as a battering ram and even set off car bombs to create chaos. Security footage would later show that at 4 a.m., the truck, equipped with some makeshift metal plow, crashed through a garage door into the prison. Once inside, armed gang members attacked and threatened guards, who were left with no choice but to release the inmates. 9 prisoners, all members of the Pueblos Unidos gang, escaped in 6 different getaway cars. As they sped away, 2 car bombs exploded in different parts of the city, which were meant to divert attention while the escapees fled away. Also, they found tire spikes on the road leading towards the prison, which was meant to prevent police from reaching the prison in time. April 18, 2023. Jose was ultimately arrested after 4 months of being on the run. This time he was put in a max security facility, with the strongest measures being taken to ensure he won't break out again. Which brings us to this next person, who also refused to bide his time in prison and orchestrated a violent prison escape. Number 4. Ernesto Alfredo Piñón de la Cruz. Ernesto, also known as El Neto, was deeply involved in a life of crime from a young age. In 2007, when he was just 18, he led a wave of robberies, kidnappings, and horrifying murders that shocked the state of Chihuahua. A year later, his notoriety caught up with him, leading to his identification, arrest, and subsequent imprisonment. However, that's far from the end of his story. January 1st, 2023. El Neto managed to escape from Cerezo No. 3 State Prison in Ciudad Juarez, along with 24 other inmates. This daring jailbreak involved a mass shooting that killed 17 people, including 10 guards. But he wouldn't stop there. This wasn't the only incident. 4 months before the escape, there was a riot in the same prison, along with coordinated shootouts and arson attacks throughout the city, resulting in 11 fatalities. Now, the purpose behind these acts was to prevent El Neto from being transferred to a more secure federal prison. But before all this happened, El Neto was infamous for being the ruthless leader of Los Metzicles, a criminal gang primarily responsible for fueling the violence in Juarez. His gruesome signature was shipping the heads of his victims to their families in coolers. When El Neto was initially apprehended, he was facing charges of 30 kidnappings and multiple counts of homicide. He received a sentence of 224 years in prison. Despite being in prison, authorities discovered that he had access to millions of pesos in cash, a personal phone, a TV, and other VIP amenities, all discovered after his escape. But how did this even happen? 2010, just 1 day before he was supposed to be sentenced, some of his followers launched an attack on the convoy that was taking him to court. Unfortunately for them, the attempt failed and El Neto ended up getting wounded. However, his gang would never give up on trying to set him free. January 1st, 2023. They finally managed to pull it off. His gang would execute a vicious attack on the prison. It all went down around 6:30 when a white Hummer H2 pulled up and a guard was killed at a checkpoint near the entrance. The checkpoint attack was actually a diversion for the planned riot that erupted inside the prison. So during this chaos, 10 guards, 7 inmates, and 2 gunmen lost their lives. On top of that, Neto and 29 other dangerous cartel members managed to escape. However, his newfound freedom didn't last long. January 5th, El Neto was found. He was fatally wounded during a shootout with police. Instead of rushing him to a hospital, the authorities decided to take him to the police station. That was a precautionary measure to avoid making the hospital a target for Los Metzicles. Paramedics were ready to treat the wounded suspect at the station, but he was already dead upon arrival. Now, the next person on this list also pulled a daring escape, but he was far more fortunate than El Neto. Number 3. Victor Manuel Felix Beltron. In 2020, Victor pulled off a daring escape from prison just before his worst nightmare became a reality, being extradited to the U.S. Now, before his capture, Victor was CFO of the notorious Sinaloa cartel. He even worked as a lieutenant for El Chapo's son, which gave him some serious connections. Now, thanks to these connections, he managed to evade capture for quite some time while police were hot on his trail, but his luck would eventually run out. October 2017, Mexican authorities finally caught up with him at a fancy residential complex in Mexico City. He was then placed in the highly secure Altiplano prison, a place known for housing dangerous and high-profile criminals. But a year later, he was taken to another jail facility in Mexico City in preparation for his extradition to the U.S. However, this would turn out to be a huge mistake. The new prison wasn't nearly as secure as Altiplano, and it was within these walls that Victor saw his golden opportunity to escape. January 29, 2020. Victor carried out his audacious escape from the Mexico City jail, along with 2 others who were also awaiting extradition to the U.S. During roll call, the sudden disappearance of Victor and the two other guys freaked out the prison authorities. They searched the entire grounds, but it turned out that these three dangerous criminals had managed to slip away without a trace. And the question on everybody's mind was, how did they do it? It turned out that these guys' cells were unlocked, and they somehow managed to cut through a bar and drop down to a common area. They would then use wire cutters to slice through the fencing at the top of a wall and jump into the outdoor jail yard. After that, they got a ladder and climbed up a wall, cutting through some more wire at the top to get to a vehicle on the other side. That vehicle was still within the prison security perimeter, and it went through a guarded exit. It wasn't even searched, as it should have been according to their rules. The guards driving the van had been told to take another prisoner to the hospital, and the city surveillance cameras caught the van heading in that direction. However, they missed capturing the moment when the prisoners actually got out of the van. Victor Manuel Felix Beltron is still at large to this very day. We here at Dynasty can't help but wonder how he managed to pull it off. But we guess he must have learned a thing or two from his boss. Number 2. El Chapo. January 19th, 2001. El Chapo grew tired of prison life. He'd been locked up at Puente Grande, a max security prison since 1995, for his involvement in a violent shootout 2 years prior. Now, despite being behind bars, he still managed to enjoy some of the luxuries he had on the outside. He had good food, played volleyball, and even enjoyed the company of women. All of this was thanks to Damaso Lopez Nunez, the deputy director of security at the prison, who made sure El Chapo's needs were met. In return, Chapo showered Damaso with money and gifts, providing him with a lavish house. He even covered the medical bills when one of Damaso's children got injured in an accident. Unfortunately for El Chapo, Damaso left Puente Grande in the fall of 2000 after the government took action to stop corruption within the prison. January 18, 2001, El Chapo faced another blow when the Supreme Court of Mexico ruled that the U.S. could extradite Mexican prisoners as long as the death penalty wasn't on the table. So his worst fear of ending up in a U.S. prison cell became much more real. The very next day, El Chapo broke out of prison. With the help of a guard known as El Chito, he was smuggled out of the prison in a laundry cart. For the next 13 years, that drug lord hid out in the Sierra Madre Mountains, running his drug empire while a massive manhunt made no progress. As time would go on, he became more reckless and even attended a family reunion in Sinaloa. However, justice finally caught up with him again when some disloyal bodyguards of his tipped off the police about his location. February 22, 2014, El Chapo was finally recaptured after hiding in tunnels for days. And we all know his second incarceration was very short-lived. July 11, 2015, El Chapo made his second escape. At 8:52 p.m., guards who were keeping an eye on El Chapo saw him go into the shower area of his cell, which had no CCTV coverage. When he didn't come out after 25 minutes, the alarm went off and guards rushed to check on him. You could only imagine how these people felt. They discovered a ladder leading to a 1.5-kilometer tunnel buried 10 feet underground, which led to a construction site. Near the end of this tunnel, they found a motorbike, most likely used by Chapo to make that daring getaway. Now, his escape was a major embarrassment for the Mexican government. Within hours, the entire country was on lockdown. Flights were canceled and soldiers were deployed nationwide to track down the notorious drug lord. A $60 million bounty was offered to anyone who would give information leading to his arrest, but El Chapo once again had vanished into thin air. January 8, 2016, El Chapo was captured for the third time in Los Mochis, Sinaloa, after a fierce shootout with Mexican Marines. January 19, 2017, his worst nightmare came true. He was extradited to the U.S. on multiple serious charges. After being found guilty on all counts, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Following that sentencing, Guzman was transferred to ADX Florence in Colorado, which y'all know is the most secure prison in the United States. We've talked a bunch about the people staying in this place, with their administrative segregation, meaning they're stuck in solitary confinement for 23 hours each day. And when they do get that 1 hour outside, it could be at any random time, day or night, and they're kept under restraint, handcuffed, shackled, or both. Their diet's also restricted to ensure that the food can't be used to harm themselves or create unhygienic conditions in their cell. El Chapo must be struggling at Florence after having endless privileges in his previous prisons, but the question still remains, do you think he could possibly pull off a third escape? Well, since its establishment in 1994, no prisoner has ever successfully escaped from this supermax facility, so the odds are definitely not in his favor. And number 1. Ovidio Guzman Lopez. We've all heard the saying, like father, like son, but Ovidio Lopez here, the son of El Chapo, took that to a whole new level. When their father was taken to the U.S., Ovidio Guzman and his brother, Ivan Archibaldo Guzman Salazar, rose through the ranks of the Sinaloa cartel, gaining complete control over its cannabis and cocaine distribution networks. These siblings, known as Los Chapitos, didn't stop there. They started getting into the world of methamphetamine, producing over 5,000 pounds per month. And just like their old man, they were ruthless, engaging in torture and mass killings. October 17, 2019, it seemed like justice had finally won when the Mexican army captured Ovidio Guzman in Culiacan. However, not even the federal government was prepared for the blowback. Hundreds of heavily armed cartel members turned the city into a war zone, threatening to cause mass civilian casualties. They threatened to attack an apartment complex where relatives of local military personnel lived. Hours later, Ovidio Guzman was freed, with President Andrés Manuel stating that he supported the decision to prevent further bloodshed. January 5, 2023, Mexican authorities would catch up with Ovidio again in the Jesus Maria district of Culiacan. Now, the night before his arrest, he'd been enjoying a family party, and they caught word of it. The military wasted no time and executed a pre-dawn raid on his residence, using helicopters and APCs. And within just 10 hours of entering the premises, they'd successfully apprehended him. The Air Force would take him by chopper to Altiplano, that max security prison we talked about, later that afternoon. The day after his arrest, a federal judge placed Ovidio Guzman under a 60-day preventative detention to allow U.S. authorities to formally petition for his extradition. Now, following his arrest, chaos erupted. The U.S. consulate in Hermosillo received reports of gunfire, roadblocks, and fire throughout the cities of Culiacan, Los Mochis, and Guasave. The U.S. Department of State declared the highest level of travel advisory, warning against travel to Sinaloa. The Sinaloan governor, Ruben Rocha Moya, even urged the public to stay indoors. The chaos resulted in the closure of Culiacan International Airport as 2 planes were attacked by gunfire. Shootouts were even reported on the runway. Attacks on 2 trucks on Highway 15 in neighboring Sonora led to the cancellation of flights from Ciudad Obregón International Airport as well. Looting was reported in parts of Culiacan, with numerous businesses and banks announcing temporary closure across the state. 10 soldiers, 19 gang members, and 1 police officer lost their lives during the chaos. Among the victims were an infantry colonel and his 4 escorts, who were ambushed and killed by cartel members in Sinaloa. Try to understand that all this unfolded because 1 man was arrested, but despite all that terror, Ovidio Guzman wasn't released, and the prison security measures were heightened to prevent any escape attempts. February 2023, the U.S. formally requested Ovidio Guzman's extradition. September 15, 2023, the Mexican government extradited Guzman to the U.S. to face drug trafficking charges. He pleaded not guilty and is currently being held at the MCC in Chicago, awaiting sentencing. Who knows, maybe after that, he'll be reunited with his father.